Hey, welcome back. I'm just in one of my walking videos, as you can see, and I want to give you a roundup on some of the news and developments I've been seeing in crypto and Bitcoin. So the first piece of news is the US markets have actually started out in the red, and this is mainly to do with this continuing debacle, as we all know, with the trade war, the business on tariffs. The federal courts have just recently ruled the reciprocal tariffs that Trump and his administration team was imposing to the countries were illegal, but then suddenly reinstated them, whether blanket tariffs can actually go ahead after all. And I think this is one way of just saying, well, let's allow the Trump to continue such that they can reach a successful deal conclusion with his partners. So that's really one of the main reasons why we've seen these dips in the actual financial markets, particularly in the US and elsewhere, because it's all inherently linked. We're living in an interconnected world, and this is ramifications is quite widespread, as we see. What I'm trying to say here is there's always going to be a reason to worry about something, and where there's unrest, where there's uncertainty, the stock market don't like it, and this is the reason why we are seeing these dips and volatility. So the point here is we should always stick to our own convictions. We should never fall in the trap of panic selling, because that's the worst mistake we could ever do. We need to see our own investment decisions, whether we decide on high-graded stocks, for instance, or certain crypto digital assets, or Bitcoin. You need to see them through into the long term as much as you're able to. The second piece of news, which could explain the recent dip, is the fact that there's been some inflation reports that's been published down in the US where the actual inflation readings dipped to 2.1% in April, as consumers in the country have been spending less. Now, overwhelmingly, we can all hardly agree that seeing a drop in inflation, it can only be a good thing. But what is slightly worrying is if the consumers aren't spending as much, then that is a cause for concern. And when it comes to the next set of financial policy committee meetings, and when the central bank of the Fed reconvenes, maybe there's going to be less of an excuse for them to actually drop their fund rates and maybe defer it to the remainder of this year, which the expectation is still for one or two more rate cuts to happen, not just in the US, but in other largest economies. The next one is to do with the recent drop of the lawsuit on Binance from the US Securities Exchange Commissions. Now, this is a good signal, because as a result of the Trump administration coming in back in power, they've actually appointed one of their pro-crypto, pro-business SEC chair. And as a result of this dropping of the lawsuit on Binance, as we know, is one of the largest crypto exchanges out there, well, that signals a positive leaning that the US wants to open up its doors to the rest of the fintech players in the crypto industry, Bitcoin, digital assets at large, which is a great thing, right? Because that's the whole point. We want to support innovative players to bring the capital, bring the fintech companies, bring the top talent into the country, start settling themselves to invest, to make more new jobs, and for the country to thrive. So this, I keep advocating and pointing this as an example in the US, but why aren't we seeing this happening elsewhere? Now, there's other regions around the world. I mean, I've made a recent video on the UAE and Dubai, a recent video incidentally today about it. But, the region there, they're doing something. The Far East in Singapore, they're doing something. And everywhere else, but in Europe, we're not doing anything. Other countries, they need to take heed of what they're doing, follow their example, and trying to replicate the model, because at the end of the day, we pay these individuals, we pay these politicians to think foremost for the best will of the country and its citizens. So kudos to US, and I can only hope and pray that Europe, fundamentally Europe, because they're the ones lagging behind the most with respect to its peers elsewhere. So this is a good thing, and we should follow example. And incidentally, this brings into my next piece of news, where in the UK, Nigel Farage, who is the far right-wing leader of the political party, namely called Reform, where he's made a pledge that if his political party were brought in power, one of the first things he will do is to usher through legislation to make the Bitcoin strategic reserve in the UK. So he's following the example of what Trump has done. And this is going to be a domino chip effect with the rest of the countries, nation states to follow suit. So that is positive. The next piece of interesting news is we're seeing increasing rates of adoption of Bitcoin into the corporate treasury reserves in the sports leagues. So Paris Saint-Germain, who is one of the top French football or soccer teams, have just announced incorporating Bitcoins into its balance sheet. So that's clearly going to open up the rest of the sporting leagues arena in terms of adoption of Bitcoin in this balance sheet. And lastly, very interestingly, Tether. We all know that Tether is the largest private issuer of the US dollar pegged stablecoin, and they made an announcement that they are holding, I think, almost 100,000 Bitcoins in its corporate stash, as well as some ounces of gold. Now that is very interesting because I've made other videos on the importance of stablecoins, where we shouldn't be disregarding their role in the crypto industry, because they clearly play an important role, particularly for me as a medium of exchange type crypto asset, because it enables those cross-border payments, those cross-border transactional settlements, rather than relying on traditional SWIFT-like bank-to-bank transfer, where we have to be worried about hefty fees and those elongated settlement times to settle those transactions. Well, in the case with stable coins, that's not the case, right? It's a fraction of a second and a fraction of the cost to settle transactions cross-borderless with the blockchain. So that is, for me, the ultimate value add for stablecoins, not to be invested as a store of value. For me, that is ultimately Bitcoin and maybe one or two other interesting digital assets, but more on a shorter term horizon than the one that I have kind of Bitcoin. So that's all I'd like to share with you today. There's an awful lot going on, and like I said, the message is clear. Stick to your own convictions, don't fall into panic sell, and if you have surplus cash out there and you're wondering what to do with it, and you haven't allocated some of it into Bitcoin, then maybe perhaps now is the right time to do so. So hopefully you enjoyed today's episode, and I'll see you the next time.